All right, so you're working on a sermon or maybe getting ready for a Bible study on 1 Timothy 2, 1-2,
Uh-huh.
and you're looking to go a little deeper than the typical interpretations.
Right.
We're really diving deep today
Yeah.
into some fascinating AI analysis of how other pastors are approaching this passage.
Okay.
We're going to unearth some unique themes and some sermon illustrations
Interesting.
that'll really get your congregation thinking.
I like it.
What's really cool is that we can actually analyze hundreds of sermons with tools like Pastors.ai now.
Yeah. It's not just about pulling out, a couple of quotes here and there. It's
Yeah.
about seeing the bigger picture, understanding all the different ways that this passage is being used.
And it's pretty amazing the diversity that we found.
Yeah.
One theme that really stood out to me was this idea of the church as a pillar of truth.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'll admit, I had never really connected that directly with 1 Timothy 2, 1-2 before.
It's a new way to think about it for sure.
Yeah.
One sermon that really dug into this was living as the pillar of truth in the church.
Okay.
From Community Baptist Church. They
Yeah.
use this really powerful image of the church, like literally holding up truth
Wow.
in a world that's constantly trying to knock it down.
So how does praying for those in authority
Yeah.
actually support this pillar?
Well, think of it this way, like a pillar needs a really strong foundation to stand strong.
Uh-huh.
When we pray for leaders, we're not just, saying good luck with everything.
Right.
We are actually asking God to give them the qualities that make them effective leaders.
Like what?
Things like wisdom, integrity, a heart that's aligned with God's truth.
So it's less about trying to control the policies that they make
Mm-hmm.
and more about strengthening their character,
Yeah,
which then in turn strengthens the church,
exactly.
makes that pillar more stable.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you look at the historical context,
Okay.
it gets even more interesting. The early Christians were facing persecution
Oh, yeah.
and false teachings all over the place.
Yeah.
So strong godly leadership wasn't just a nice thing to have, it was crucial.
Wow. So praying for leaders wasn't just, a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
It was a strategic move to protect the church.
Exactly.
Do you think that's something that resonates with the challenges that churches are facing today?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
All the cultural shifts, the moral debates, the misinformation that's spreading everywhere.
It's almost like we're back in those early church days, in a way.
It is, in some ways.
So this image of the church as this unshakable pillar
Yeah,
is really powerful and relevant today.
it is.
Another theme that we saw emerge from the analysis was this idea of dual citizenship for Christians.
Oh, yes, this is a good one.
I thought so too.
There were a couple of sermons that really unpacked this.
Okay.
Faithful engagement, navigating elections with God's guidance,
Mhm.
and navigating dual citizenship, faith and civic responsibility. Both of them really dig into this tension
Yeah.
between our earthly responsibilities and, our ultimate loyalty to God's kingdom.
Makes you wonder how the early Christians under Roman rule actually managed this.
Right.
It must have been so hard
Yeah.
to balance those competing loyalties.
That's tough.
And that's where I think 1 Timothy 2, 1-2 gets really interesting.
Yeah.
When we pray for leaders, are we saying that we recognize their God-given authority, even if we don't agree with everything they do?
Right.
Does it actually change how we view our own role in society?
Now, those are some good questions.
So I've got to ask about sermon illustrations.
Hi.
I love a good analogy.
Oh, I know you do.
I do.
Well, I think you're going to love this one from the sermon Supporting Our Pastors, Love, Honor, and Prayer.
Okay.
They compare members of a church to either leeches or remora fish.
Okay, that's a new one for me.
Right.
Yeah,
So a leech latches onto something and it just sucks the life out of it.
right.
But a remora fish attaches to a shark. Uh-huh.
And actually helps the shark by cleaning off parasites.
Interesting.
So the question is, are we like leeches?
Draining the life.
Yeah, draining our leaders with negativity and demands?
Oh.
Or are we like remoras,
Yeah.
supporting them and allowing them to thrive?
That's a powerful image.
I know, right?
It really makes you stop and think.
It does.
Am I a leech or a remora?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a message that could really resonate with a lot of people.
Absolutely.
It speaks to the heart of what it means to be part of a community.
For sure.
I can already see how I could use that in my next sermon.
Good.
Were there any other out-of-the-box illustrations that came out of this analysis?
There was one that really stood out to me, and it's this idea of living an Eden-focused life.
Eden-focused.
Yeah, this also came from that Community Baptist sermon.
Okay.
They're suggesting that when we pray for leaders, we're actually trying to restore a sense of peace and harmony in the world, almost like we're trying to recreate that original state of Eden.
Beautiful.
So it's not just about the well-being of our leaders.
Right.
It's about their impact on the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's about their role in creating a more just and compassionate society.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, it really connects the personal with the global,
Yeah.
the spiritual with the practical.
My mind is just buzzing with possibilities right now.
That's great.
Before we move on, though, I am curious about something else that the analysis revealed.
Okay.
We saw a huge variety of cross-references used by pastors.
Oh, yeah.
Everything from John 10.10 to 1 Peter 4.8, Hebrews 13.1 Civic, even 2 Chronicles 7.14.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they were pulling threads from all over the Bible to try to illuminate 1 Timothy 2:1-2.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So what are we supposed to do with all these cross-references?
Well, that's the fun part, right?
Okay.
Each one of these verses adds another layer of meaning and helps us see this passage from a different perspective.
So, for example, John 10.10, where Jesus talks about the thief coming to steal and kill and destroy. That connects to this idea of spiritual warfare.
Right.
So praying for our leaders isn't just about, their happiness.
No.
It's about protecting them from these spiritual attacks that could really derail their leadership and harm the church.
Exactly.
And then you've got 1 Peter 4.8, which talks about love covering a multitude of sins.
Right.
Reminding us that our prayers should be motivated by love. Not just love for our leaders, but love for our communities, love for the world.
Absolutely.
So we're praying for unity, reconciliation, healing.
Yeah.
We're asking God to break down those walls of hostility and division that seem to be everywhere these days.
It's so important.
And then we have Hebrews 13.17,
Yes.
which talks about obeying and submitting to our leaders.
Right.
Because they are watching over our souls.
They are accountable to God for how they lead.
So it's not enough to just pray for them.
Right.
We have to actually respect their authority and follow their guidance, recognizing that they are accountable to a higher power.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted approach to engaging with authority.
Yeah.
Prayer is important, but so is action and recognizing our own responsibilities within the community.
My mind is officially blown.
Good.
This is so much more than just a simple instruction to pray.
It really is.
So we've got prayer,
Uh-huh.
spiritual warfare, historical context, a call to action,
Yep.
and we're just getting started.
I know.
But let's come back to those practical sermon illustrations for a moment.
Oh, okay.
You were talking about the leech and the Remora fish. Were there any others that really stood out to you?
The Navigating Dual Citizenship sermon had one that I really liked.
Okay.
They talked about the parable of the talents.
Oh, I love that parable.
Me too.
What was their take on it?
Well, they argued that choosing not to vote is basically like burying your talent.
Oh, wow.
It's a form of civic apathy.
Interesting.
Like you're failing to engage with your responsibilities as a citizen.
So we're not just called to pray for our leaders.
Right.
We're called to participate in the process, to use our voices and our votes to help shape the direction of our society.
Yeah. And they even went so far as to say that if you don't vote, you're basically giving up your right to complain about the outcome.
Ooh, I like that.
It's like saying, well, if you didn't bother to show up and make your voice heard, then you don't really get to whine about the results.
It's about taking ownership.
Yeah.
Recognizing that our choices actually have consequences.
Absolutely.
And that ties right back into this whole idea of dual citizenship, doesn't it?
It does. We have a responsibility to both our earthly kingdom and our heavenly kingdom.
And sometimes those responsibilities seem to be in conflict.
They do.
And that's where prayer and discernment come into play.
Right.
It's about seeking God's guidance and making decisions that honor both of those callings.
Exactly.
My sermon notes are overflowing at this point. I am seeing so many new ways to approach 1 Timothy 2:1-2.
That's what we like to hear.
It's not just about praying for our leaders in this vague general sense. It's about understanding the power of prayer.
Yeah.
The spiritual battle that's going on around us.
Right.
The historical context, the call to action.
It's all connected.
The pastors. AI analysis also uncovered some really interesting historical details about the Roman Empire.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. The Navigating Dual Citizenship sermon highlighted this cultural norm of emperor worship in the Roman Empire.
Oh, wow.
It was expected that everyone, no matter what they believed, would participate in these rituals and acknowledge the emperor as a divine figure.
So submitting to authority wasn't just about paying your taxes
Yeah.
and obeying the laws.
Right.
It was about potentially compromising your faith and bowing down to a human being as a god.
Exactly.
Wow. No wonder the early Christians faced such intense persecution.
They refused to participate in those rituals.
Right.
They refused to acknowledge any god other than the one true God.
That took a lot of courage.
It did. It was a matter of conscience,
Yeah.
a matter of standing up for their beliefs, even if it meant risking their lives.
It makes you think about the challenges that Christians face in some parts of the world today.
Yeah.
Where their faith isn't tolerated, where they face discrimination and violence.
It's a reminder that prayer is not just this private, personal activity. It can have real-world consequences.
Oh, okay.
It can be a source of strength and courage for those who are oppressed.
Yeah.
A catalyst for social change. Even a force that shifts the balance of power in the spiritual realm.
This deep dive has been absolutely incredible.
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
It's amazing how a familiar passage can spark such profound insights.
It is, isn't it?
When we really take the time to dig in.
For sure.
I think our listeners are going to be really blown away by the depth and the richness of 1 Timothy 2, 1-2.
I hope so.
Before we move on to the next section, though,
Okay.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question.
Right. I like it.
Remember that concept of the Eden-focused life
No.
that we were talking about from that Community Baptist sermon?
Yeah.
Is praying for leaders is about restoring that harmony, that Eden-like state in the world. What are some specific actions that churches can take to actually reflect that Eden
Oh, that's good.
in their communities today?
Yeah.
What does it look like to build that kind of peace and justice, not just in our prayers, but in our everyday lives?
That's an excellent question.
I think it really challenges us to move beyond just words and into action.
It does.
It's about taking all of these powerful themes and illustrations that we've been talking about
Yeah.
and turning them into tangible change.
Love it.
I can't wait to see what our listeners come up with.
Me too.
All right.
It's good stuff.
That's good stuff.
All right.
We'll be back in a moment with part 2.
Okay. You know, it's interesting how the sermons we analyzed approached this whole idea of political engagement.
Yeah?
Some of them really leaned into that dual citizenship concept,
Well,
encouraging Christians to be active in the political sphere.
So not just praying for leaders, but actually voting, advocating for certain policies, maybe even running for office themselves.
Exactly. And the sermon, Faithful Engagement, Navigating Elections with God's Guidance, really emphasized that civic duty aspect. It's about bringing your faith into the public square, letting your values inform your political choices.
But then there were sermons like Engaging Politics with Truth, Love, and Discernment
Right.
that seemed to be a little more cautious.
Yeah.
How did they approach it?
Well, they really stressed the importance of discernment.
Okay.
Not getting swept up in partisan politics or compromising your faith for the sake of political expediency.
So it's a delicate balance.
It is.
Engaging, but not being consumed.
Right.
Keeping that ultimate allegiance to God's kingdom in mind.
Exactly.
Where does prayer fit into all of this?
Well, prayer becomes essential.
Well,
Seeking God's guidance, asking for wisdom to navigate those ethical gray areas, to see the truth clearly, to know when to speak up and when to stay silent.
it's not easy.
It's not.
It's almost like prayer acts as a filter,
Yeah.
helping us sift through all the noise and the chaos of politics to make decisions that are actually aligned with our faith.
I like that analogy.
And some sermons even connected prayer to the idea of spiritual warfare.
Oh, yeah.
Now that's an interesting concept.
It is.
How did they link those two ideas together?
Well, the sermon, Engaging Politics with Truth, Love, and Discernment, referenced that documentary 2,000 Mules,
Okay, I've heard of that.
which alleges voter fraud.
Right.
They use that as an example of how deception can infiltrate even something like our elections.
So they're suggesting that there are these spiritual forces at play,
Yeah,
trying to undermine democracy and sow discord.
that's one interpretation, yes.
Yeah.
And they argued that prayer is a powerful weapon against those forces.
So we're calling on God's power
Mm-hmm.
to expose the truth,
Yes.
to protect our institutions,
Yeah.
and to guide our leaders toward righteousness.
It raises the stakes, doesn't it?
It's not just about political differences anymore.
Right.
It's about a battle for the very soul of a nation.
Exactly, and that's why prayer becomes even more important.
Yeah.
That's not passive. It's an active engagement with these spiritual forces.
We're taking a stand for truth,
Yes.
justice, and God's values.
Absolutely.
So 1 Timothy 2, 1-2 becomes this call to action.
Mm-hmm.
We're praying with a purpose, understanding that there's this spiritual battle raging all around us.
Right.
Did the historical context factor into any of this?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Remember, Paul was writing to Timothy
Uh-huh.
at a time when Christians were living under Roman rule.
Right, they were facing persecution.
Exactly. Praying for leaders wasn't just a polite thing to do. It was a matter of survival.
They were praying for protection.
Mm-hmm. For wisdom to navigate a hostile environment.
Right.
For opportunities to share their faith.
It puts things in a whole new perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
And it reminds us that prayer isn't just a personal activity.
Right.
You can have very real consequences in the world.
It can be a source of strength for those who are being oppressed.
Yeah.
A catalyst for change. Even a force that shifts the balance of power in the spiritual realm. Wow, my head is spinning.
I know, right?
There's so much more to 1 Timothy 2, 1-2 than meets the eye.
It's amazing.
It's about the power of prayer. The
Yes.
spiritual dynamics at play, the historical context, the call to action.
It's about connecting the dots,
Yeah.
weaving all of these threads together
Mm-hmm.
into a message that's challenging and inspiring.
Grounded in scripture,
Yes,
but also totally relevant for today.
absolutely.
Speaking of inspiration, we were talking earlier about sermon illustrations.
Uh-huh.
We discussed the leech and the Remora analogy.
Were there any other illustrations that you thought were really effective?
Yeah, the Navigating Dual Citizenship sermon had another one that I really liked.
Okay.
They talked about the parable of the talents.
Interesting. How did they apply that parable to this passage?
No, well, they argued that not voting is basically like burying your talent. It's a form of civic apathy.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like you're failing to engage with the responsibilities that come with being a citizen.
So it's not enough to just pray for our leaders.
Right.
We actually have to participate in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Use our voices and our votes to help shape the direction of our society.
Exactly. And they even went so far as to say that if you don't vote,
Yeah.
you're basically giving up your right to complain about the outcome.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, like saying, well, you didn't bother to show up and make your voice heard, then you don't really get to whine about the results.
It's a call to take responsibility.
It is.
To acknowledge that our choices actually do have consequences.
Yeah.
And that ties back into that concept of dual citizenship, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. We have a responsibility to both our earthly kingdom and our heavenly kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those responsibilities might seem to clash.
They do.
And that's where prayer and discernment come in.
It's about seeking God's guidance and making decisions that honor both of those callings.
Exactly.
This has been so insightful.
I'm glad.
The pastor's AI analysis also highlighted some really interesting historical details about the Roman Empire.
Oh, yeah, it did.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. The Navigating Dual Citizenship sermon mentioned that it was a cultural norm in the Roman Empire to worship the emperor.
Wow.
Like, it was expected that everyone, regardless of their personal beliefs, would participate in these rituals and acknowledge the emperor as a divine figure.
So submitting to authority wasn't just about following the laws. It was about potentially compromising your faith and worshiping a human being as a god.
Exactly. And that's why the early Christians faced such intense persecution.
They refused to participate.
They did.
They refused to acknowledge any god other than the one true God.
It was a matter of conscience for them.
Yeah.
Even if it meant risking their lives.
Their courage is so inspiring.
It is, isn't it?
They were willing to face anything for their beliefs.
And it makes you think about the challenges that Christians still face in certain parts of the world today.
Absolutely.
Where their faith isn't tolerated, where they face discrimination or even violence just for being a Christian.
It's a reminder that prayer is not just a personal activity. It can have a real impact in the world.
It can be a source of strength for those who are oppressed.
Yeah.
A catalyst for change. Even a force that shifts the balance of power in the spiritual realm.
This deep dive has been truly eye-opening.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's amazing how such a familiar passage can yield such profound insights when we take the time to really explore it.
It is, isn't it?
I think our listeners are going to be fascinated by the depth of 1 Timothy 2, 1-2.
I hope so.
But before we move on to the next section,
Yes.
I want to pose a question to our listeners.
Okay.
You know, we've been talking about the challenges of living as Christians in a complex world. How can we, as pastors and Bible study leaders, equip our congregations to navigate this tension between their faith and their civic responsibilities?
That's a great question.
It's something that I think we all grapple with.
We do.
Perhaps we could explore that a little bit further in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, it is a question that requires some careful thought
For sure.
and a nuanced approach, you know?
Yeah, there are no easy answers here.
No.
But I think this deep dive into 1 Timothy 2:1-2 has really given us some valuable tools and insights that we can use to help guide our congregations.
Yeah.
For example, that emphasis on prayer as a force for change, this idea of spiritual warfare,
Right.
and that recognition that we actually have responsibility
Yeah.
to engage with the world around us
Yes.
in a way that reflects our faith.
And we can't forget about the historical context either. I mean, seeing how the early Christians navigated their own political landscape can teach us so much today.
They faced so much pressure to conform,
They did.
to participate in emperor worship, to compromise their beliefs.
Yeah.
And yet they found ways to stay faithful while still being active members of their society.
It's amazing.
It really is.
Inspiring.
It reminds us that we don't have to choose between being good citizens and being devoted followers of Christ.
We can be both.
We can be both.
And in fact, we're called to be both.
Exactly.
And that's where this whole idea of dual citizenship comes in.
Yeah.
Recognizing that we have a responsibility to both our earthly kingdom and our heavenly kingdom.
And even though those responsibilities might feel like they're in conflict sometimes, we can find that balance through prayer, through discernment, and through a commitment to actually living out our faith in every area of our lives.
In every area.
Speaking of finding that balance, let's go back to those cross-references that we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
We were looking at how John 10:10, which talks about the thief coming to steal and kill and destroy, connects to this idea of spiritual warfare. And then 1 Peter 4:8 emphasizes that love covers a multitude of sins, reminding us that our prayers for our leaders should be motivated by love.
Absolutely.
And then we have Hebrews 13:1-7, which tells us to obey and submit to our leaders because they keep watch over our souls.
It's like a pattern.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Seems like all these cross-references are giving us a really comprehensive picture of how we should engage with those in authority. We're called to pray for them, yes. But also to respect their authority, to follow their guidance,
to hold them accountable,
and to recognize that they're ultimately accountable to God for their leadership.
It's not just about saying a quick prayer and moving on. It's about actively participating. Using our voices and our votes to shape the direction of our society.
Holding our leaders accountable for their actions.
Recognizing that our faith has implications for every area of our lives.
Including the political sphere.
Exactly.
And that can be a tough message to get across.
You can.
Especially in today's world.
It's so polarized.
But I think it's a message that our congregations need to hear.
They do.
It can give them the power to engage with the world in a way that is both faithful and effective.
Maybe even transformative.
I love that.
Who knows what could happen if Christians started really living out their faith in the political arena? Praying for their leaders with passion and purpose, holding them accountable with grace and truth, working together to build a more just and compassionate society.
I get chills just thinking about it.
It all starts with those simple words from 1 Timothy 2:1-2.
I urge then, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness.
Powerful words.
Powerful words.
Words that can change the world.
If we let them.
If we let them.
Well, I don't know about you, but I am feeling incredibly inspired.
Oh, too.
1 Timothy 2:1-2 will never be the same for me.
It's amazing how a familiar passage can become so rich and deep when we really take the time to explore it.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring these themes, to dig deeper into the scriptures, and to let the words of 1 Timothy 2:1-2 transform your own lives and ministries. Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep diving deep.